Shall I start us off? Okay. Hello, everybody. I see it's only the diehards here on the third day of the book fair, but you're very welcome. Thank you very much for coming to our session. I'm extremely pleased that we've put together this panel. My name is Antonia Lloyd-Jones, and I'm the co-chair of the Translators Association, and I'm a translator from Polish. I've got some wonderful people here for you today because I think we all know that public libraries are very much under pressure in this country, and they're all suffering from lack of funding and government cuts and all the other horrors, and are having to rebrand themselves. But I think if we translators, and not just, understood that we have similarly difficult tasks, we're always trying to promote our work, and it's a difficult thing to do, and we sit complaining about how nobody wants to know about the books we've translated or to buy them or read them. Well, we have to get up off our backsides and go and promote them, and one way to do that is to work together with public libraries. And personally, I've had some very good experience of this lately, which I'll tell you about. But I thought we'd have this panel so that we could share ideas and talk to people who are actually involved with public libraries and people who have good ideas for how we can get involved with them to promote our work. So first I'm going to introduce our guests. On the far right we have Clarke, and Mike is the Director of Libraries for 3 central London boroughs, Hammersmith and Fulham, Kensington and Chelsea, and the City of Westminster. So you can already tell that within the British Library Service, one person does 3 jobs. That covers 21 libraries, 3 archives, a music and a prison library, and providing library services to schools. And there are more than 5 million people a year using those libraries. Think of the audience you can have, translators. It's out there waiting for you. And they have in their resources 1 million books and other items in the collections. And there's a great deal of foreign literature in translation and work in foreign languages within those collections. And Mike has long involvement with various wonderful cultural organisations such as the Arts Council England and the Poetry Book Society and Spread the Word, which is a literature and audience development agency for London. And then next to Mike is Schwartz, who I'm sure many of you will know, who is Vice Chair of the Translators Association and one of this country's leading translators from French, with 70 plus books to her name. And Ros has won several very great awards, quite right too, and is extremely active in the world of translation, giving talks, organising summer schools, and just being tremendously generous to all other translators and anybody interested with superb ideas. Every time I've ever had a problem in my career, I've talked to Ros, and instantly there's a practical solution that's wonderful and positive and creative. Okay? And then next to Ros is Rachel Van Riel. Now I've embarrassed her now, look. Rachel Van Riel is another remarkable person who is the director of Opening the Book, which is an organisation which is dedicated to developing public libraries in this country, to not just encouraging public libraries to have a good design and to be reader-friendly, but to be reader-centred in all sorts of imaginative ways. And she's done a huge amount to train library staff, and is really a keystone in this country to that rebranding of libraries that I talked about before, that's encouraging new ideas in libraries and making them have a continuing role and not just turn into dusty corners where people go and use the internet and so on and sell each other drugs or whatever they do in some of them. So she's very, very active. And then to my immediate right is Robyn Marsack, another remarkable person who is the director of the Scottish Poetry Library, which is based in Edinburgh. And she's been there for the past 15 years. And as well as promoting Scottish poetry and having a massive archive of Scottish poets, they have organised a large number of poetry translation workshops and have a large amount of archive material that's not just written word poetry, but a lot of audio stuff and podcasts. And so Robyn has also organised poetry anthologies, bilingual editions, and herself translates from French with great success. And I myself was at a poetry festival in Scotland a few years back with a Polish poet and was deeply impressed when we were both approached by someone from Robyn's library to record some of our work for posterity. So there's a great deal happening there. And I'm going to ask each of them to say something about their different initiatives. And I'd like to start with Mike and to ask you something about the foreign collections that you have in the London Borough Libraries, and also something and about the translated books that you have, and also what collaboration you think there might be between translators and your library.
I think I have to switch this on, so can people hear me? Great. Thank you for that introduction, Antonia. That was quite a feat of getting through all of us there. I was just sort of thinking as you were speaking, one of the earliest books I read or had read to me in translation as a child was Pippi Longstocking, The Adventures of the World's Strongest Girl, translated from Swedish. And there was a bit in Pippi Longstocking where she passes a chemist's shop and it says on a big advert in the window saying, "Do you suffer from freckles?" And of course she's red-headed and freckled, and she thinks a polite question deserves a polite answer. So she goes in and says to the chemist, "No." And I think I enjoy having freckles. So I think it does tend to depend on how you look at things. And we are in a very challenging time, as you all know, for local government, for public services, and public libraries particularly, because we've got to think about what our future is, just as the whole publishing trade, I think, is pondering what the future of publishing will be in an electronic era and a time when people can download almost anything on a device like this quickly and easily and almost free of charge in a lot of cases. But I think there is a real role for libraries around shop window and showcasing, going back perhaps to the chemist's shop, really showing people what you can access and what is available to you. I was just talking to Rachel before we started, and we go back quite a long way in terms of how we promote and develop literature and reading with people. And you were saying, Rachel, I think that the days in which people came in purposely to find a particular book or title are probably a bit gone now, and it's a lot more about browsing and finding things that appeal to you. So I think one of the very first things I would emphasise is it's the shop window, it's putting things in front of people and showing them what they could have and what they might not have thought of having. And this makes me think a bit about why literature and translation particularly is perhaps becoming more popular and having a bit of perhaps a bit of a better profile than it used to do. And I wonder if some of that is to do with some of the works on television, so some of the Scandi crime dramas we're seeing that are so popular. Big fan of The Bridge, for instance. So I think that's raised the profile and the availability of a lot of literature and translation around certain genres. I would say one of the most popular areas we have in public libraries now is graphic novels and anime, and we run some incredibly well-attended, knowledgeable reading groups, people who are absolutely passionate about graphic novels, most of which are frankly literature and translation by another name. So I think again, bringing people in front of what's available and showing them what they can access, I think is a huge issue for us. Libraries continue to offer good selections of literature in original languages, and I think that remains a hugely important thing. It's a big challenge for us because we want to provide literature for people in different languages, different mother tongues, people coming to this country. But in London, as you probably know from the Olympics bid, 300 languages spoken on a daily basis. How on earth are we going to make that work for us? How on earth are we going to provide everyone with something that is good for them, is relevant to them? And I think literature and translation probably is part of the answer to that as well, about bringing those cultures home and giving people access to it from a wide range of language backgrounds. I think just looking at children's literature, back to Pippi Longstocking, but a whole range of other stuff, seems to me to be a bit of a freer market. I don't know, children's books don't seem to have quite that same challenge around saying this book came from another language as being translated. So there's maybe something interesting culturally there for us to think about as well. And I think there is more available to us, thank you. There is more available to us with digital platforms, with a wider range of sources, with a wider accessibility of materials as well. But how do we educate not only our librarians and our booksellers, but also our readers as well? I'll just sort of close in saying a few things that libraries might be able to offer. Coverage, so we can give you access to audiences and audiences who want to try something new. People come into libraries because they're exploring, so they're up for that. I think we can offer events. The reading groups, very important, lots of people take part in them, but also salon type events, and we were just talking before about the possibility of busking spaces for translators reading from their books, short bursts, quick bites and sound bites. And I think translator events and workshops as well. And perhaps we're starting to offer writer resources in libraries, maybe resources for translators too. So just to close, really, I was sort of thinking about Haruko Murakami today, the author of Norwegian Wood, and his comment that books are about the tiny secrets of other people's lives. It's about having something new to say, and good bookshops and good libraries and good librarians, the ones that are surviving in these turbulent times. They certainly take risks and they don't underestimate their readers. But I'd be really interested to know what we can offer you as well.
Okay, thank you very much. I myself have recently taken on a new incarnation as a busking translator in local libraries, and I have a kind of reworkable presentation which I alter, and I've been taking it to different libraries and letting the locals know a little bit about what Polish literature is available in translation, because people simply don't know. And I do a little handout as well, so they go away with a list of books. And it's very simple. It's a lot less heavy duty than going to an event with Zdzisław Skrobolowski talking about his latest saga of family life in interwar Lithuania, which can be a little bit off-putting. But so it's just me reading you little bits and pieces for your amusement. And so that's been my humble start on this. But I think Ros, and certainly just chatting before the event, there's a great buzz of brilliant ideas here of what else we can do. So I'm going to hand over to Ros Schwartz to tell you about some of her ideas.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Okay, I'm a great advocate of workshops as being a showcase for what translators do. So I think some of the most exciting events I've been part of have actually been in libraries. And I think there's two reasons for that. One is the passion and the commitment of the librarians, and also of the readers. And mainly outside London, there are a lot of people out there who read enormously and are fascinated and interested in the process. And I remember a particular event I did with Rachel a long time ago where we did a translation workshop for librarians. And one of my missions, I think, is to have an army of proactive, passionate translators up and down the country going into libraries and engaging with readers through workshops. And it is possible to do workshops with people who don't actually have a foreign language. That's the translator's skill in running those workshops. And I think it alters the way people read translated literature. It opens their minds up to the whole process. And people are really interested in it. A lot of readers have never met a translator. They've never thought about the translation process. And they get very enthused by it. And I think one of the things that we translators need to do is to do some training for translators who would love to get involved in something like that but feel a bit shy. And I know a lot of translators are very shy, retiring violets, and I was one myself, believe it or not.
I don't believe it.
I was. But, you can get over it. And so I would like us to start thinking about ways we can train translators to go into libraries and run workshops, both for the librarians, because librarians are such important influencers over what people read. They have a consultancy role. Readers ask them. And I think publishers all too often leave librarians out. We all do in terms of promoting books. So I would like to have a sort of three-stage thing. Training the translators, talking to librarians, doing workshops for librarians. I mean, we had such a fun day doing workshops with librarians, some of whom are still coming back to me, asking me to go into their schools and libraries to do workshops. and engaging with readers in that way. So that's one thing, and it's a very simple thing to do. It doesn't require massive resources. It requires a venue, libraries, and people, readers, librarians. The other thing is a lot of libraries, as Mike said, have reading groups. And we can be going along to our local libraries and saying, have you got a reading group? Could I make a suggestion? Would you like to have a look at some of these books in translation? And I could get the translator to come along and talk to you, if you like. I mean, I'm actually gate crashing a reading group because I saw they were doing a book that I translated. And I said, would you like me to come and talk to you? And they said, oh, yes. It hadn't occurred to them. So actually engaging with the reading groups, because reading groups do often ask questions about the translation, but there's nobody to answer them. So I think, taking those, being proactive in those kind of initiatives is another thing we can do. And also including libraries on promotional tours. When our publishers, they set up tours and they do gigs in bookshops and universities, why not in a local library? And so again, bringing libraries in on those kind of events is something that we can just automatically suggest to our publishers. And you said, Mike, that you would like to make libraries available to translators. And one thing that we're launching at the Translators Association at the moment is an idea of translation surgeries. We're doing 2 as a pilot, which are going to be at the Free Word Centre in May and June. And if you're interested in that, come and talk to me afterwards. But that, again, is something that can be done up and down the country where local translators, the idea is very simple. Translators get together to thrash out translation issues with work in progress. They just need somewhere they can go and sit and talk to each other. And by doing that in a library, those translators can then engage with the librarians, with the reading public, and build a sort of community around translated literature. So I think there's lots we can do, and I'd like to see lots of translators, even if you are a very, very, very shy violet, getting involved in these kind of things.
Yes. Thank you. I'll just add one tiny little thing. If, like me, you're a translator who travels about the country with their authors, interpreting for them, and you're worried that you might not get an audience in some city that you don't know very well, why not the day before or a few hours before your author's event go and do a translator event where you tell local people about the literature in a less kind of terrifying way, and then you might persuade some of them to come to the author event as well.
Lock them in the room.
And also, it's an opportunity, yes, lock them in the room, that's right. But it's also an opportunity because you're there already, someone's presumably paid for you to be there. You might as well take advantage of being there. And now, perhaps Rachel would like to tell us something about her initiatives at opening the book. I'm very interested in the reader-centred approach, and also would love to know more about your Which Book search engine.
Am I switched on? Yeah, good, great. All of our work starts from readers, and I think that's the connection for translators as well. Because translators, you guys are interpreters, you're guides, you're navigators, you stand between one thing and another, and you help one set understand the other set. So you're perfect intermediaries. That's also what librarians do. And I think starting from the reader changes some of the ways we promote. The traditional ways of promoting literature are always around single authors, single titles, or occasionally genres. The way people read isn't like that. The way people choose their reading is they stand in front of a whole lot of names they don't know, and they vaguely remember reading something about that person in The Guardian 2 years ago and thinking, have I read that before? We don't remember, many of us, even keen readers, don't remember names and titles. It's not the way we function. We love reading, we're always looking for something different, we're always looking for that elusive read, but actually the traditional methods of searching and the traditional methods of promotion don't meet those needs very well. So I think it's really worth looking at how you answer those needs differently, because that is where you get an audience. If any of you haven't seen whichbook.net, do go on it. It's a fantastic site, and all the books are read by librarians and scored in a shared consensus way so that you can choose the qualities you're looking for in the book and you don't need to remember an author at all. So do you want a little bit of sex so-so sex or lots and lots of sex in this book, and you move a slider along and you then combine it with, do you want it to be really optimistic or bleak? Do you want it to be happy? This sounds very crude. Go and try it. It's not crude at all. It will deliver something like, I can't remember how many millions if you do the computations of different possibilities, far more than actually are in the database. What the database is stuffed full of, though don't tell anybody, is translations and new writers and independent presses, and we never put the biggest bestsellers in. We never draw attention to that because people will then think, oh, well, that's not a book I want to read. We want them to find the book and then think, oh, that looks interesting, and then go for it. And I was thrilled. The Independent Foreign Fiction Prize, 2 of them are on there already, 3 are out with our readers, and the 6th one has just been put on because of that announcement. So if any of you have any translations into English in this country, let us know. It is adult and it is fiction more than anything else, but so that's a great one. Have a look at that. Just very quickly, some of the other things that I think we need to look at are making reading groups. There are, I think, the last count, 15,000 in public libraries in Britain. There was only, well, I started the first one in 1984 in Bradford, and it's now 15,000, okay? And one of the things that reading groups do is they always read a book which is a bit more challenging than what they'd read by themselves. That's the point of it. Everybody has a mixed diet of reading, but there's kind of genre reading you feed, you know, you read like ordinary, like McDonald's, you just have that and it's great, you know, occasionally. But the really challenging stuff people want to do together. So there's a network there to get into. How do those people choose those books? It's one of the most difficult things for them to do. And when they get the information about your books, it will look totally intimidating. And I am talking particularly about outside London, which is where I live now. I live in Yorkshire. London's a hugely diverse city. Yorkshire's got diverse populations too, but there are pockets which really are pretty monocultural. You may have heard the phrase Yorkshire chauvinism, and it still exists. And, you know, what we're trying to do is to persuade people to take a risk on a book they've never heard of at all. And there are lots of fascinating ways to do that. We have done a lot of promotions which just say take a risk. And people will try something under the banner, take a risk. Under the banner, this book's good for you, this book's won a prize, this book's the best book of Lithuania this year, they walk past. Challenge them to take a risk, they might do it, okay? The first big social event we ran was a fantastic wine and books event, which I've repeated many times. You make a social event with wine, which people love, and it's something until global warming gets a bit better, the Brits don't do very well, particularly in the north of England, and people love wine. Wine used to be a snobby drink, it's not at all now. Wine's in every supermarket, and beer had to go snooty to kind of, compensate. And books have done much the same thing. Books used to be, literary fiction was a slightly perceived as elitist, snobby thing. I don't think that's true anymore. I think that's hugely shifted, and we need to move with that. So I think a wine and books event, you can put lots of different translations into that. You can do it at all kinds of levels. You can make it very basic with a country and a book, or you can be really sophisticated. I did one for the British Council with 8 different countries there, and we tried to match certain wines to the literary quality of key writers. That was absolutely fascinating. If you get somebody who knows a lot about wine, it's a brilliant thing to do. Okay. And one last one, just before I finish. What I'm sort of advocating is that you sometimes need more of a generic approach rather than the single book, the single author, which is the way the whole commercial world works, okay? Then that's going to get you in. And I wonder whether many of you know about a really successful group in the north of England mostly, but they do work elsewhere, called Murder Squad, which has been going for about 10 years, and it's crime writers who felt that their books were not getting out enough and they weren't part of the London scene, everything like that. And they've been going 10 years now. They support each other, and it works as a kind of loose group, which means that they can set up events where maybe 2 crime writers or 3 crime writers go to talk. It's not always the same ones, and you don't know quite who you're getting. People will buy into the notion of the group, and that's going to deliver something interesting, irrespective of which individuals it was. Well, I would love to see a translators squad, because I think you could do that brilliantly. Every time I put translators in front of people, they're such good conduits. You wouldn't be any good at your job if you couldn't do that. And that's what readers need. They need help just to get over the humps, the barriers that are stopping them having a go at this, really. So I would love to see a translators squad. I think there's about 10, for instance, in the Murder Squad. And you can then, not everybody can do every gig. It's quite hard being a solo person promoting your own books, But if there's 3 of you, that's much more fun, much more shared, and gives a variety of options to the people coming. And I think that would be a great thing to offer to literary festivals as well as to libraries.
Thank you very much. We were saying on Monday, if anyone was at the TA panels, one of the ideas that came up from the USA was that at the American Literary Translators Association, they have readings of their work with nothing else. It's just a nice, raw short piece of text. And I was thinking that we don't do that enough here. We don't read each other's work. And there was a very nice event with Czech literature this week that I went to. There's the people who read are sitting right here. And it was extremely nice just to listen to some extracts from books without any kind of deep discussion.
I agree absolutely, but I think the balance between the framing of the reading and the reading itself is really important. I don't want a huge long lecture about where they went to university and how much they've done. I don't want any of that. But to plunge me deep into something, and I don't know how long you're going to read for, and paragraph 3, I'm not quite sure where you are.
There needs some shaping, absolutely. There would be an introduction.
You've got the ability to get that right.
Yes.
Think about poetry slams and the way that, they all go and they all want to deliver their own poem and they don't want to listen to anybody else. And you've got to create an atmosphere where people want to listen.
Yes.
And that's your job. That's what, in translating,
Yes.
it appears to me that's what you do. Yes. Translators I talk to, you're advocates.
Yes.
You're not big egos for yourself. You couldn't do the job. You're putting somebody else out there, and there's such joy in that, I think, and you should take more credit for it.
Well, I tell little funny stories about each writer before I read their work, as partly to do that, to frame it. And luckily the writers aren't in the room, or they might never speak to me again. So you just mentioned poetry, Rachel, and that brings us on to Robyn, who is the specialist in poetry, which is something that rather gets overlooked. So I'm going to hand over to her.
Thank you. I think in some ways I'm dealing with a double, what I might call disadvantage. So first of all, you think translation's a disadvantage, and then you've got poetry on top of it, which for many readers is a kind of a double whammy of things that they're not interested in. Nevertheless, one of the great things about poetry is what I would call its portability. Now, I'm not going to talk about whether you can translate poetry or not. I can have that discussion with you in great depth, and please do see me afterwards if you want to do that. But the portability of poetry is a wonderful thing because you can take a very short piece and you can deal with the whole of it in a very short span. So if you're talking about a reading group, for example, opening a reading group with a poem is a really interesting thing to do, to drop poetry where it's least expected. So I want to say things under sort of 3 S words. I'm quite keen on alliteration, so I've thought of sound and serendipity and sought for. So under sound, Antonia's just mentioned the idea of podcasts. Now, a lot of libraries now are really upping their audio content and using sound as one of the means of communication with people. And the whole idea of podcasting with a translator with the author or a translator with a native speaker, a little bit of discussion. The mysteries of translation are, I have also found, infinitely fascinating to people. I mean, reading groups and audiences love to hear why you chose to say river and not stream, or, why you didn't translate the name of a street, or what particular difficulty you found in talking about grandmothers in your novel. All those kind of minutiae which you make those big decisions, how you come to make those decisions, and what kinds of problems different languages throw at an Anglophone writer and reader are fascinating to people. And you can have a very short podcast, 5 minutes, or you can have, a half-hour in-depth discussion. And it's a way of also getting the sound of the native language into people's ears, the sound of the original language into people's ears, as well as discussion. So I think podcasting for us is a great method. And of course, although we are public library, we're an independent library, so we don't belong to the public library system, and we have a bit more freedom than other libraries do to do that kind of thing. But the sound is really, I think, one of the fascinating things to concentrate on. So you can deliver it by sound, and you can do that, of course, through events, through writers coming to read. When I say sought for, I mean I'm talking to an audience that, a group that might already be interested. You know, you don't have to go out and fish for them; they're already keen. And yes, you can do a reading workshop, but you can also do a writing workshop. And a lot of libraries are interested and cater for creative writers. And although this might be anathema to some of the translators among you, but Ros raised it, so I'm happy to raise it then. You don't have to know the language. And we've just started doing these translation workshops where we have a native speaker or a poet who's writing in a particular language with their translator, and we circulate some texts in advance, and then people come along and have a crack at translating with the poet there and with the translator or a native speaker there. And it's very fascinating to see what they come up with. Now, I have to say that your author has to be very open to this, because it's a very generous thing to let your work go out into the world and have it discussed in front of you and somebody turn around and ask you exactly what you mean, because if you wrote the poem in that way, that was exactly what you meant, but still you have to unpack it. So you've got to have the right author, but those can be fascinatingly creatively stimulating for creative writers, and I think that there ought to be more of translators working with creative writing courses and creative writing groups to get them to think in that way. So a public library can be a venue again for doing that. So that's people who already know things but are curious. And the other thing is serendipity. So there's a mass of books out there. There's a mass of books in your library. How do you draw attention to the titles on your shelves? How do you put them in front of people? And it has been said of me that postcards are my answer to everything, and they are quite a broad answer. So I've put a whole lot of these around the place. Do pick them up. We produce postcards all the time, but it's a great... You can do that very cheaply now. You could just have a really brilliant opening sentence from one of your novels and take it along to your public library and say, would you just like to have a few of these lying around so that people know to get this off the shelf? And the other thing that we've been successful with, and I'm talking to the librarians here, but as Rachel so rightly said, you translators are the conduits. You know, you've got to go and speak to the librarians. We put up downloadable posters on our website. Can I recommend our website? It's www.scottishpoetrylibrary.org.uk. And we put downloadable posters on it because they are only tiny phrases, because you can do that more easily with poems, but and people can print them off wherever they are. They're cheap to print off, and you can put them up in a school, or you can put them up in a library, you can put them up in your workplace. I love the idea of people having those around them. So it's another way of infiltrating, if you like, knowledge, and people coming across things by chance. And because you're here and you're more or less captive, and because I've spoken about poetry, I can't stop without just reading you 2 lines of poetry. So I just thought I would read you a little translation of a Marshall epigram, epigram by Marshall, and it's called Torch. So take this torch to light your way at night. It's shock-proof like my heart and weather-tight. It's a beautiful translation. It sets off a whole discussion about whether you translate old poets as modern people or you don't, or how they transport each other. I mean, I could go through all 6 of these, and they would be bases of lovely discussions.
Thank you very much. I'm afraid a terrible thought crossed my mind, which is slightly from the sublime to the ridiculous, which is you could also, as well as having cards with a sentence and the name of the book, I'm thinking about public toilets, so you could write on the lateral. The same thing. So so it's not just me. Okay. That's a piece of time that's wasted. You're standing there, you're captive, aren't you? Okay. So, right, I'm going to blitz the British Library. But I wanted to come back to something that Mike mentioned, which is that he said that he feels that there's less of a barrier in children's literature in translation. However, there's been a bit of a problem in recent years with a perception, something we've noticed is that there's less contemporary children's literature being translated. And Daniel Hahn, who's standing over there, pretending that he's not standing over there, has been doing a lot of good work. He's turned his back on me, there you are, to try to draw attention to this fact and to encourage some more translation of children's literature that's being written now, because there's definitely a gap. And I was just thinking how I was first asked to give a talk about Polish literature, well, to read extracts at a library as part of a diversity month. And I'm very often asked, does the fact that there are lots of Polish people in this country make a difference to my work? And I end up sort of giving this pathetic answer, which is, well, most of the Polish people who've come here don't read in English. And perhaps some of their friends are interested and are more aware, British people are more aware of Polish culture because they've made Polish friends, which is great. So they do, and the Polish people often want to tell their British friends about their culture. And I was just thinking, with children's books, perhaps there's a potential here for translators in a sort of very mini version of what Sarah Ardisoni is doing with Translation Nation. Perhaps translators could do little workshops with children in libraries. And I mean, this happens at book festivals. We all do children's events where children make something or whatever around the content of a book. But I'm thinking that libraries are a good place for that, because my brother's a children's librarian in Nottingham and is often having to entertain children. To my deep shame, he reads them My Naughty Little Sister. It's his favourite thing to read them. But I'm just thinking that there's a creative opportunity there with children there are so many children with lots of different languages here, and there are already initiatives happening. It might be nice to do something within libraries on that front.
I absolutely think so. I mean, I think one of the reasons that there's a real market here is that children's book sales are going up. Borrowing of children's books from libraries, in contrast to adult use of libraries, is increasing year on year, thanks to a lot of good initiatives over the last few years. Children are voracious readers. Give them one book and they'll want another 10 straight away. So there is constantly a need for new material. So I think there is a huge, potentially untapped market there about bringing in literature for children from other cultures and other languages. And I think we would love to see that sort of thing happen in libraries, that sharing of different literatures and traditions. I was just in a session with Spread the Word, which I have some involvement with, and there was a publisher there talking about the absence of sufficient materials for her children and how her little boy took home a book from Tesco and coloured in the faces brown because he wanted to see something more that represented his sort of background and culture. So I think that kind of sharing of resource could be hugely, hugely beneficial for everyone. And I would just say, sort of on a more general point, don't be shy about coming into libraries and suggesting things to us and offering us things and promoting your work. We will absolutely have your arm off for that, I promise you.
We had a recent experience of a Polish poet coming to be a poet in residence at our library, and just at the last minute we invited a school heard about this, and they said, we've got quite a few Polish students at our school, could we bring them to meet him? So they did, and he was quite a sophisticated and complicated poet, and the discussion, as I understand, the discussion was all in Polish. But it was in front of two of their teachers who didn't speak any Polish. And the Polish students, 16-year-olds, had to interpret for their teachers. And this was hugely, I don't like to toss this word around, but it was hugely empowering for them. And they, for once, had the knowledge. And they turned around afterwards and said to us, that's the first, well, actually, they said to one of my colleagues, that's the first time I haven't been in the I don't know what it's called. I mean, it's the equivalent of the naughty step, during this lesson, because I've been able to tell my teacher what this poet was saying, and I never knew that I could do that. And it was a hugely enriching and releasing experience for them. So there's that toing and froing. The other thing that we managed to do once, and we're going to do again, is on National Poetry Day we issue postcards all over Scotland, 300,000 of them. And this year there's going to be a Polish poem on one of them. And it's a children's poem that apparently loads of Polish people know, but of course we don't know it. And we're translating it for this audience. So I think there's ways of the cultures interacting like that are very enriching for young people.
Thank you. Roz.
Yeah, I just wanted to add something to what Robyn said on talking about empowering of students. I did a workshop in a school, but it's equally something that the school could come to a library to do, where I did a translation of a teenage comic strip. And I explained in great detail to the class that it was about, making something that worked in English. I mean, there was a lot of teen speak and teen slang, and the idea was to really get something that worked. And what was really interesting, the school had invited another school. So we had one fairly elitist school with, sort of Oxbridge kind of type candidates, and the other was a kind of a local school, which was a very, very different kind of school. And what was interesting was that the students who got what I was talking about were the ones who were not the star pupils. They totally understood what they were being asked to do and wrote some absolutely stunningly entertaining strips, which they then performed, and a lot of them were really into kind of performance. They blew everybody away. So you had these students who were usually, the bottom of the class, who just wowed everybody, including the teachers, and the usual sort of straight A students who couldn't break out of the, yes, but the French word says this, and so we should say that in English. They didn't get it at all. And then you had the teachers who I warned them not to, but they did want to have a go themselves. And they tried to write teen slang and make complete idiots of themselves in front, because they were using sort of teen slang that was like a year out of date. So when they read theirs, all the students were sort of going at their teachers. So there was a wonderful kind of reversal going on there. And I think doing things in libraries with schools is one of the other things I wanted to say. And can I just quickly mention two other initiatives? There's one event that I've stolen this from the Norwegians, who have put translators in libraries with a big screen working in real time. So you have a translator sitting there translating, and it's visible on the screen what they do. So they'll change that word. And then people can come and talk to them and say, well, why did you do that? And it's, again, if the technology is there, you just need a computer and a big screen, and sort of a translator in residence kind of thing, which, again, stimulates that kind of discussion. And then the other thing which we do a lot at book festivals is translator slams, or duels, where you have two translators translating the same text and a moderator. The two translations will inevitably be completely different, and the conversation that comes out of that is, well, how come you did that and you did that? All the big translation questions come up, and audiences love it. It's much more exciting than having a translator standing there saying, well, I'm a translator and this is what we do. It's the best way, and it's fun. So there's lots of things we can do in libraries.
I just wanted to put in a plea for some of that energy and creativity to go into writing that's promotional as well. Not always doing the activity of the translation, but how do you make that book connect to an audience that knows nothing about it? Because I think a lot of the writing about books is so deadly. And it's all done to prove things. It's done to prove how knowledgeable you are and what you've read. And basically, when I look at a lot of those things, I just feel totally intellectually inadequate or guilty. And I think of how many things haven't I read? And it's all very focused on the now. I looked at what I happen to be reading in my bag, and I'm reading something that won the Independent Foreign Fiction Prize in 2010. That's just typical. I've only just seen it. I'm not going to be up to date. It's just a little bit more random than that. But it's probably a fantastic book. It didn't suddenly go hopeless because it's 4 years old, 5 years old. And I would love to see that kind of creativity, a workshop around how do you write about these books in ways. Now, that's what the library is going to need to promote it. So we do a lot of training of library staff, and some of it's at quite a basic level. When you make a display, you must put in 50% of books that you wouldn't read yourself and that you don't like. And if they will do that, it transforms, suddenly translations will be in there. So that's step number one, to get everybody to do that, to understand that they shouldn't just put in the things that they like, that, But step number two is more complicated, and we did a project in Wales on that. Wales is a bilingual country, so translation is absolutely essential, and a huge desire to promote Welsh writers in writing in Welsh, and a lot of English-speaking, non-Welsh-speaking Welsh people with that role, feeling rather uncomfortable and very nervous about it. And we actually produced materials to help them promote a book that they didn't understand the language of. And that was really, really helpful, I think. Simple things like pronunciations even. People trip up over things like that and they think they're going to be stupid. Now, anybody who's not English here won't understand this, but the English are just appalling. The English are just terrible with their embarrassment about these things. So they will, they'll die before they'll pronounce somebody's name wrongly in public. They'll just not read the book. And they're missing so much with that blinkered attitude, Nobody else in any other country that is not an island, well, actually, no, I'll tell a lie. The Americans would as well, but I know more about the English. So we have to break down those barriers and getting the kind of creativity that you've been talking about in the creative sessions into the promotional writing, so that it's not all market speak, that just doesn't work for people. It's got to be what this book's going to, how does it fit in your life? And how do you get people to understand what to expect? Here's a very simple one. We did a lot of exercise when I first started this work with fruit and vegetables. And I started a training day with a bowl of fruit and vegetables and got people to think about when in their family different generations started to eat different things, because it depends on your family background as well. Be very, very different for people with different backgrounds, but it also is huge changes in British culture. When I was a kid, red peppers didn't exist for a family like mine. My kids would be more familiar with red peppers than they would be with turnips. These are massive social changes that have happened. Everybody eats a very diverse diet. Why don't we read a more diverse diet? But if you put a crisp Granny Smith apple on the table and you put a lychee on the table, okay, and you start reading a book, you start tasting the apple thinking it's going to be a lychee, or the lychee thinking it's going to be the apple, and you spend the first 100 pages trying to wish it was the other thing that you're not tasting. The whole art of reading is to go with the taste that writer's trying to give you. And I think ways to help people do that are really, really important. And in translation, the translator's the person who can help you most to do that. Because I can't taste the original language, but I can taste your interpretation of it, your bridge of it. And so I'm just making a plea for the creativity around the promotional copy and the stuff that's written about the books, not just about the content and do it yourself.
Thank you. Yes, promotion is very important and how you present it, and it does take some thought and care, absolutely. I think we've got some time for some questions. So, gentleman here. Wait for the microphone. Sorry.
Yeah, I'll be quick, don't worry. Hi, I'm Malcolm Burgess and Heather Reyes. We're at Oxford Books Publishers. We've worked with libraries for the last sort of 5 or 6 years in terms of Arts Council-funded world writing projects. Just 3 things, I'll be quick. Ros, totally agree. Translators must be dynamic. We had a brilliant Turkish translator who belly danced, brought in food, music, and was a great translator, and she wowed the whole room, I tell you.
That's a tall order. All these people sitting here.
Setting the bar high here.
Hey,
I just want to share that with you.
I'll sign up for belly dancing classes.
Okay, well, we'll expect that. Rachel, I wanted to say, we worked a lot with book groups, and just to give you one little kind of snapshot, we're working actually with London boroughs and Essex at the moment, but just one quite big town in Essex, through the library service, we discovered had 41 book groups. That's just one fairly big town in Essex. I'm sure it's the same elsewhere. Bear in mind that, and we're actually going to be working with, they're all coming together, because book groups like meeting each other.
Yes.
because they operate quite sudden. But bear in mind that book groups are obviously kind of 5 to 10 people, so it's not, whatever's going to happen. The
They
last
often
thing,
call
sorry.
them readers' days when all the book groups come together, and often they'll bring authors to that, and we should be bringing translators.
Absolutely, yeah. The last thing, which is that kind of a slightly boring thing I wanted to say, I just want to strategically, in terms of TA, Reader Development Agency, I know there's a reading agency as well, and Libraries Arts Council, shouldn't you guys be getting together in some way at a quite a kind of strategic, I know it's money and all the rest of it, but at a quite a strategic level. Just thought I'd share that. Thanks.
Thank you. There's a lady here with a question too. Does anyone want to address that, or do you want to say something in response to what the gentleman said, or no? Should we just? Yes, sorry. Go ahead.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to say that a lot of what's been said, from my point of view, sounds really exciting. And the idea of training translators to go out and interact with librarians and readers sounds wonderful. And as soon as somebody does it, I'll be on that bandwagon. I really want to do it. Some of what was said made me think of something that happens in my area where I live in London. They're called Brixton Book Jams. They happen about once a month, and they're published writers that go and read bits of their work. They have 5 minutes each. There isn't that much faff around who they are, so I was wondering maybe I might even suggest it to my local library to have a translation book jam. And I also thought the other thing briefly about poetry. Tragically, I allowed school to put me off poetry. It's been really nice to hear you today. It's been really nice being read to. And for me, because I'm passionate about translation, often translated poetry attracts me more because I'm interested in translation, so I overcome the poetry hurdle. And I also really love being read to. So from the point of view of somebody who is scared of poetry but would like to be less scared, something like poetry jams would be really great, and to have maybe poetry in community languages and like speakers, local speakers of community languages, reading in your original language and sparring off a translator or an English reader who can read in English and doing that might be a really interesting way of bringing translated poetry to libraries.
I don't know whether anybody does translating speed dating, but that there's. Has anybody done that? I don't know. I mean, so that you can go around and sort of try things out. Don't know. Maybe a possibility.
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to your suggestion about the Brixton Book Jams, which I think is a great idea to sort of, gate crash in on things that are already happening. But one of the questions I ask myself is, should we be seeing translation as a sort of a ghetto, like, there's translated books and then there's other books? Or should translated books be part of books? And I would, rather than saying, let's have a Brixton Jam on translated literature, just say, let's make sure there's translated books in every time, because I think what we're talking about is great books. The fact they happen to have been written by somebody not in English, I don't like the idea of seeing translated books in this sort of ghetto. Yes, but I think we should definitely be looking at those sorts of initiatives and saying, okay, let's make sure there's a translated book or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 in there. But thank you for
just
that.
to briefly clarify, that particular event is for local writers, and the writers read from their own work. So in a way, we need to check that those events have ground rules.
There are translators in Brixton, I know them.
Yeah, hopefully.
Yeah, I just agree with Roz. I think I want to see really good representation of different languages and cultures across our library stocks and in our festivals and in our reading group activities. I don't think we should be necessarily just saying let's do it specifically because it's translated, but I think we need to make sure it's there, make sure the door's open, and that we're looking for ways to ensure there's that representation.
Thank you.
Hi, I've really enjoyed the panel discussion. I'm a Brixton-based translator, and I've been to my Brixton library because the author I've translated, I actually discovered her on the shelf of the library, and I went and made that suggestion about the reading group, and guess what they said? It's the funding issue. How the librarian said, how can we afford to buy 15 copies of this wonderful sounding African novel? So I wondered if the panel could make some suggestions about funding, because these are all wonderful ideas and I'm sure we all want to get involved, but when it comes down to it, libraries are going to say, it's all about money. So
Barnett Libraries actually buy sets of books for reading groups. I don't know if other boroughs do it, but Barnett Libraries, you can go to them and you can ask for a set of books and make suggestions to them. So that's one thing that might be worth exploring. But I mean, how do they get their other books? If they're reading books in their reading group.
Libraries have still got book budgets. They're in hard times, but they are still spending on books. So it's a choice about what they spend on. And there's some big discussions about the cultural role of libraries, and that I think we've been trying to change this for 25 years. They don't believe there is an audience for your book. They're wrong, but that's what they believe. So they buy what they think people want. They regard themselves as a conduit in local democracy. If people want this, we'll give them it. That's exactly the whole basis of book supply in libraries is on that basis. That means, I'm afraid, that they support the biggest commercial marketing and the biggest commercial publishers, which I feel is quite wrong, and we have to have things which rebalance that, which is what we do on something like Which Book. But the thing you have to convince them of is that there is an audience. And that's where I come back to the whole thing we've been talking about here, that they will not be convinced by you telling them how important this writer is and that they've won a prize here and there. They need to be convinced that somebody might want to read it. So you have to come up with the arguments for that. You know that people will want to read it. How can you articulate that? People are much more open to diverse writing than narrow-minded people choosing think. The other problem, it's not a problem, it's maybe just a fact, that actually it's all done now much more automated. So the library has to write a brief saying, we want to make sure there's a certain percentage of new writing in here, or we want to make sure there's a certain representing of diversity. And if they don't do that, they won't get it. So the librarian's no longer making the choice, and that person may not have the influence, but at the higher level, there is a brief for the supplier, and the suppliers can actually be requested to do things. And Mike and I have probably been on the same side in this one. There was a huge resistance amongst librarians to moving to supplier selection because everybody thought it would be terrible. I have to tell you, the suppliers chose more diversely than the librarians did. So, you know, that is just a fact, I'm afraid. It is very good, but it's the truth. So, but you can persuade these things to change, but you have to persuade people that somebody wants to read it. It's not the value of the thing in itself, it's the value of it to the readers. And if you show that a couple of times, then they start to trust you. That's how it works.
I mean, Rachel's right, and I wouldn't suggest that we mirror authors who go in and push their books to the front of the shelves in Waterstones or write positive reviews of their own works under false names on Amazon. But you can request things you want to see on library shelves. You can tell the library staff what you want, what you think should be there. You can make a case for your own book to be there. You can get in touch with your local head of library service, or even contact the suppliers and tell them about your own work yourself. I think it's very much about getting the message out that there is a market there. And as I said in my opening remarks, I think what I'd like to see is is that libraries will be the place that don't just assume readers aren't wanting to be challenged, that they will actually put new, challenging, interesting stuff in front of their public, because that's what we offer. It's a place to try something without risk.
Because if we try and compete as libraries with the supermarkets and with Amazon, we've failed already. It's useless. That's an absolutely way to kill off all the libraries in the Western world, in my view. So we have to find other routes to go. And the best libraries are doing it. It's harder for them at the moment because their resources are being cut. But they have still got book budgets. So if Brixton can't justify buying 15 copies of an African novel, somebody should be under pressure. And if I was their boss like Mike was, they'd be losing their job.
It's not really a question, just a quick comment, but we're talking about training in translation workshops, and I've done training via the translators in schools to doing translation workshops in schools, and I'm now seeing that that's kind of crossover relevance to libraries, and so that might just be an avenue to explore.
Thank you.
Absolutely, yes. Izzy.
I had two quick questions. One to the librarians. You're saying you're always open to suggestions and new ideas for promoting books. I would potentially feel a little bit like I was treading on toes if I came into a library and said, I think translated literature is amazing. Would you like me to put together like an idea for a stand that you can put at the side of the library to promote it? And I think these are all the books you should put in. I don't know what would be the best way to sort of work collaboratively with the librarian, and also sort of a bit of difference of opinion I'm sensing between Ros and maybe Rachel on whether you should be labelling translated fiction as translated fiction. Sort of Rachel's idea that one of the ways to get more people reading translated fiction is to sort of see it as a challenge, sort of take a risk, try something new.
But that's about risk, not about translation. You can put lots of other risks in there. So I think we actually agree totally on that. It's not a ghetto.
I mean, something new could be a first-time novel, it could be poetry,
Could
it's
be
just
lots of different things.
out of your comfort zone.
But would you be reluctant to then say, sort of, take a risk, try a translated book? Would you say that that should be seen as a risk? I'm just thinking maybe that for some people it is a risk and a leap to try a translated book because they've never done it before.
I'm asking for lots of different things. So another one might be have a treat, give yourself a treat, give yourself a break, have some indulgence, and in that will be a translated book and another book that's not translated. So there's a lot of different types of books that I want translations to penetrate everywhere. I'm not saying that all translated books are necessarily a risk. You can go the other way entirely. Give yourself a treat, and there's translations in there.
Yeah, I would never ever say, hey, try this book, it's a translation. I'd say, I've just read this amazing novel. Not even mentioning that it might be from Polish or something, because but because people do it. I mean, some of my best friends will say, oh, I never read books in translation. It's like, I never see films with subtitles. Yes. You really don't want that getting in the way, but I've just read this fantastic novel. And then they say to you afterwards, the writer had a funny name, and I saw it was translated, but I enjoyed it.
And in terms of offering to help, please do, bloody well, please do. I think most librarians would be really, really happy that someone who knows something about a subject is coming in and saying, can I help you? Can I suggest other things for other readers to look at? I can't believe anyone would turn that down or be offended by it in any way. We certainly wouldn't in any of my libraries.
I think they'd bite your hand off.
And I think, in terms of literature and translation now, I think he's breaking out of that ghetto anyway. Who'd have thought 10 or 12 years ago that Stieg Larsson would be one of the biggest selling authors in the world? That kind of overcomes this idea that it's somehow niche or ghetto or specialist, I think.
Thanks. One last question from Justina there. Yeah.
It's not a question, it's a comment. Hello, my name is Justina Czachowska and I'm from Warsaw, from the Association of Polish Literary Translators. Just a comment concerning the workshops and the lessons at schools and the financing of it. We have been celebrating the International Translators Day on 30th of September since 7 years, and 4 years we are, during this particular day, offering to the Warsaw high schools lessons provided by famous translators from different languages into Polish. And we, of course, as an association, we cannot finance that, but we asked Unique Warsaw to be our partner, and since those institutes and embassies based in Warsaw are actually ambassadors for their literature, they are paying, like, let's say £100 for their translators to provide those lessons on this particular day, and that's how we finance that. So that's also a part of idea to spread the workshop thing.
Thank you very much. And as a very last closing point, I just want to remind everybody that one of the biggest literary awards in this country, the Impact Dublin Literary Award, is that they choose the books that are judged. They're chosen by libraries. It's public libraries all over the Europe or the world. Nominate books that they would like to see considered for that prize. So be nice to your local library. And I'd like to thank our panelists very much for an extremely interesting discussion and lots of wonderful ideas. And I hope that we will see the fruits of this discussion soon. Thank you.